One for all and all for one. That was NATO's promise, but does it still hold? The alliance is gearing up for the biggest rearmament in its history. NATO wants its members to spend 5% of their national economic output on defense. Donald Trump is pushing hard for Europe to step up. But is he leading by example? He's taken unilateral military action in Iran and even threatened to pull the US out of NATO altogether. Meanwhile, Russia keeps bombing Ukraine and waging cyber and propaganda battles across Europe. On To The Point, we ask NATO in times of war, security at all costs? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's good to have you with us. These are my guests today. Sarah Pagung is a security expert and program director for international affairs at Germany's Körber Foundation. Christoph von Marschall is the chief diplomatic correspondent and former Washington correspondent for Berlin's daily Tagesspiegel. And Martin Sklenar is the head of Globsec's Future of Security program and former Minister of Defense of Slovakia. He joins us from Bratislava. To all of you, welcome and thank you for being with us. And Martin, I'd like to start with you. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, said he envisions a stronger, fairer and more lethal NATO. Does that hold? Will that happen after the summit?
Yes, certainly. We have made the preconditions for that at the NATO summit. Not only are we speaking about the inputs, the 5% of GDP, as was agreed at the summit, but this is a number that actually comes out of operational planning and capability planning that is adjacent or is following up the operational plans. What we actually need to be able to conduct defensive operations, should there be the need to do that in NATO. So yes, NATO will actually develop the capabilities in cooperation with the industry, and we have seen the industry being engaged at the summit very, very actively. Creating the capacity to sustain any potential conflict situations for the time that it will be necessary.
The question is, of course, why is this happening and why is it happening now? Christoph, Donald Trump was arguably the sole protagonist of the latest NATO summit. Will NATO from now on just do whatever Trump wants?
No, and I think it's an unfortunate narrative also. Of course, Trump is important, and of course, many Europeans try to make him happy in order that the security guarantee of the United States holds. But we should explain to the public here in Germany that we are doing it because these are our national interests. It's an unnormal thing that we depend on the US to defend ourselves. We are 450 million Europeans. We don't need 320 million Americans to protect us against 120 million Russians. We should be able to do that. The European Union is, in economic terms, 7 times stronger than Russia. So if we organize our resources in the right way, we should be able to do that. And we have, of course, neglected it over decades, not just years, decades. And we are getting back to this 3.5% for the military, which we did in Germany in the 1970s, and nobody argues, and there's not enough money for social programs or for infrastructure or whatever. And we need this 1.5% to make our infrastructure better, that we are able to transport tanks and other military equipment on trains. At the moment, German bridges are not ready to do that.
Well, that is some massive spending that you consider necessary, if I understand correctly. Sarah, NATO has been called brain dead in the past. It then showed unity after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What do you make of the current state of the Union? Can it deliver all those plans?
Well, I think also if we look at the summit right now, but also on the general state of NATO, I think that this unity we saw now in The Hague comes at a cost. So we have NATO that reinforced its Article 5, and that was quite important after President Trump kind of, took a bit back of the credibility of this article. But that came at a cost. So when we look at what was absent from the debates and from the discussion recently on the summit, it was basically Ukraine. It was also how to answer to the threat that Russia poses, not only in terms of what to do militarily, but also what to do politically. So, for example, the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, denied at the moment any possibility of new sanctions against Russia. So I think this is the general state. Europe really works hard to maintain the bond with the U.S. and maintain the shield that it provides, but that really comes at a cost, and that may, pose problems for Europe in the long term.
Let's talk about what was
Javier,
present.
Just to add on that, maybe.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Sorry, just to add on that, and you asked the question whether NATO will always do what Trump wants, but I would actually pose a different, perspective, which is. Trump also did what the Europeans wanted to hear, right? I mean, one of the main messages from the political declaration from the summit actually confirms the U.S. Readiness and commitment to Article 5 and to the guarantees that it provides. So in the end, it's not only what Trump wants, but it's also the balance that is probably finding a different place than it had in the North Atlantic Alliance before. But now we are getting to a new point where the two sides can find an agreement on what are the needs and what are the interests, but still work together.
It sounds like harmony, and maybe that is because of the commitment to spend more money by NATO countries. The 32 members plan to invest more in defense, at least 3.5% of their economic output on military spending, as we heard, plus another 1.5% for defense-related infrastructure, all by 2035. That's a total of 5%, the exact number Donald Trump had long demanded. But how solid is this agreement, and will every member really follow through?
5% of GDP on defense. For weeks, NATO chief Rutte has been campaigning among allied states to meet Trump's demands.
This is a quantum leap that is ambitious, historic, and fundamental to securing our future.
3.5% for military equipment and 1.5% on infrastructure. But some member states don't want to commit that much. We have decided to allocate 2% to the protection of Spain, Europe, and NATO. The rest will be spent on social policy, diplomacy, and foreign aid, among other things. Slovakian Prime Minister Fico recently called the demand to spend so much money absurd and raised the idea of withdrawing from the alliance to take a neutral stance. Polish Prime Minister Tusk, on the other hand, wants to equip his country with the strongest army in Europe. Already, Poland is on track to spend close to 5% on defense this year. Germany has also committed to the 5% target, and therefore to billions in debt. What about the USA? This is what Trump said before the summit.
I think they should do that. I don't think we should, but I think they should. We've been supporting NATO so long.
NATO, militarily powerful, but politically fragmented?
Martin, we just heard your Prime Minister saying that the 5% demand is absurd. What do you make of declarations like these and what they mean for NATO?
Well, the Slovak declaration is I would say it has an internal logical consistency because the political position of the Prime Minister is based on popular decisions, and those obviously very much involve social programs and other welfare spending that is critical for his support. So his declarations are very much driven by this political internal political goals. But what we have seen also in the president's appearance at the summit is that despite the position of the Prime Minister, I mean the president who represented Slovakia at the summit confirmed Slovakia's readiness to agree to this 5% goal. I understand that there will be. It will be challenging for many countries to deliver on the 5% in the 5 years, and several countries might have difficulties explaining to their electorates why the security situation demands us to spend like this. We haven't chosen this, right? I mean, it's not absurd that we have to spend 5% of GDP on defense if the security so requires, if the security environment so requires. It was Vladimir Putin who actually made the decision. And in that sense, I strongly believe there are countries who will actually pull NATO's defense spending, especially Germany, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Baltics, and Poland, who will be at the forefront of fulfilling the 5% of GDP. and there will be others who will for whom it will be challenging, and but whose defense expenditures will also be rising, including Slovakia, simply because the situation so demands.
Yes, but Sarah, how do you explain that lack of cohesion? Because on the one hand, we hear the narrative that they are united, but on the other hand, we see that reluctance from different countries. So what is it then?
So I think there are certain factors in play. So one is basically the tyranny of distance. So for Poland, for the Baltics, the Russia threat is way bigger and more immediate problem than, for example, for Spain, which is just basically more far away. It's just a question of geography. Other aspects include the societal, financial and political strain the security developments of the recent year really pose for certain countries. So, for example, if we look to Italy, which has a great debt, investing more in its defense budget is really a big strain for them financially and risk their financial stability. For other countries, so for example, Hungary, Slovakia, where you have parts of society, or especially of the political class, who are more pro-Russian and oppose a really strong stance of NATO against Russia, it's really, difficult just to impose and implement these kind of policies. So you have, with all the member states, which are a lot in NATO, you have really different domestic situations. And in the end, foreign policy is quite often not only shaped by foreign policy needs and situations, but very much by domestic situations within these countries.
And yet, that 5% budget increase, if you will, or spending increase, ultimately will have to translate into something. What do you think, Christoph, does this spending mean militarily for NATO countries?
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge we are in now. We see ahead of us. Having the money doesn't buy you military capabilities, and that is where Germany is at the moment. We got rid of our debt ceiling just for infrastructure and military spending. So money is there in theory. And we have so many misleading narratives. Oh, now we are obliged to buy weapons in the US. The reality is contrary to that. We would love to buy weapons in the US, but the US doesn't produce enough what we need. For example, air defense system like Patriot and so on. So we will have to invest in our own manufacturing. We need the engineers, we need the raw materials, and we have to get going in order. We are under enormous time pressure. NATO says that Vladimir Putin will be able to attack a NATO country in 2029. I think it could be even earlier. Of course, there's this big thing. As long as Ukraine fights and the Russian armies have to be in Ukraine, we don't have so much to fear for this attack. But the moment this war is drawn down, frozen, however you call it, he has all those armies and could go against Lithuania, where the German army, the Bundeswehr, is a guarantee force. So at the moment Putin attacks Lithuania, he attacks the Bundeswehr, and Germany is at war, and we have to prepare for that. And we are not mentally prepared, and we are not militarily prepared at the moment. So really time is of the essence right now to do exactly what you asked, to make sure that the money we have is translated into real capabilities. And it's a new war. It's not tanks, it's drones today. And we can learn from the Ukrainian theater what is important and what is less important. And that is also a mind change which we have to do.
But Sarah, does every country think that that is an actual risk, a realistic scenario that we see Russia attacking a NATO country?
No, I think, again, we have differences among the NATO member countries. So if we look to Hungary, for example, or also to Slovakia, this risk is rendered by the political decision makers in the government less probable, and that's why they act differently when it comes to NATO decisions, but also when it comes, for example, to decisions of the European Union, for example, concerning sanctions. Then you have other countries like Germany, where you have government that really sees the risk, while you have parts of the population that are quite skeptical about that. And then you also have countries like the Baltics, in particular, or Poland, who really have a great unity among the population as well as political decision makers, who really, see the threat and also see the reality of the Russian internal development and domestic development that we had over the last 20 years, and that in the end led to this kind of aggressive Russia that we see today.
It's all a matter of trust, as we know. That's a basic component of an alliance, but it seems like the era of deals and dependable alliance may be behind us anyway. Today, it's all about going solo, bold declarations and power plays to push national interests. Here's a look at 3 revealing examples.
After the US military attacked 3 Iranian nuclear sites on June 21st, Donald Trump praised America's strength.
Thank you very much. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
He acted without approval from Congress or NATO allies. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also acting alone and has convinced Trump to join Israel's war on Iran. There is no doubt that our great achievements in Iran will also help us achieve our goals in Gaza. Meanwhile, Russia continues to bomb Ukraine with no sign of peace talks anywhere on the horizon. Instead, President Vladimir Putin reaffirms his war doctrine. Anywhere a Russian soldier sets foot belongs to us. War and brute strength. What role will NATO play?
Martin, the US bombed Iran shortly after mediation efforts in Geneva by its European partners without any coordination, as it seems. What does this tell us about the relevance of this bloc?
About the NATO
Yes.
NATO bloc. Well, to be frank, Iran and its geography is a little bit outside of the NATO area of responsibility as we know it. But I get your point that this is a significant military development that the US has done. Without the coordination. Maybe there was some bilateral consultation with some allies or information before this happened. But given the nature of this operation, I would expect that the U.S. were in contact with some of other countries, especially Israel, of course. But I'm not really surprised that this took this kind of preparation and conduct of the operation. The important thing is that it was also shortly before the NATO summit, so they had a chance to talk about the motivation and the results of that, so the president had a opportunity to brief his allies directly in The Hague on his reasons, on his decisions, and what is to be expected now.
But what calls the attention is that it was happening right at the same time as the NATO members, or some of them, were actually having diplomatic efforts to solve the crisis, if you will. That's what calls the attention. Is there then unity, coordination? Does that play a role, if you will?
Well, that's always a decision between solving things diplomatically. We've seen that the negotiations were continuing for some time. I'm not really sure how much longer it would be needed to continue those discussions to get to a situation where Israel, the U.S., but also European countries would feel comfortable with putting Iran into a situation where it's not, in a position to break out, to get a nuclear weapon soon, which would, fundamentally change the security situation, not only in the Middle East, but also in Europe and, by extension, also in the transatlantic relationship.
Christoph, we also saw Benjamin Netanyahu going at it, apparently without coordination with the U.S., as talks were about to happen. Are we in an era of solo warfare, do you think?
I think I have to be here very blunt and ask that we are very realistic. Nobody cares what the Europeans say, nor Iran, nor the US, nor Israel. So we might have diplomatic declarations, we might try to talk to some of these players, but even the Iranians, who of course wanted this propaganda show, we are sitting down with the Europeans to find a peaceful solution. That is just, it means nothing. Europe should concentrate on what we are able to do and understand where we have no influence. We don't have influence in the Middle East, but in Ukraine, we play a key role, especially now that the US is doing less for Ukraine. And again, I would wish for a more unified European pillar of NATO, but even if it's not fragmented. We have a coalition of willing, which is strong enough to counteract Vladimir Putin. And that is Germany, it's the biggest economic power, Czech Republic, Poland, the 3 Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, plus the UK, which is no longer in the EU, but wants a cooperation with Europe on security issues. And when we look at Vladimir Putin, if he says wherever a Russian soldier stands, that is Russia, that's ours, okay, then we have to push them out. And if there's no Russian soldier anymore in Ukraine, then it's not theirs, then it's Ukrainian. So we should be really blunt and realistic about what we can do, what we can't do, and not feel under this pressure for unity. And if not everybody is aboard, we can do nothing. No, I would wish for more unified NATO, but I think we can work with what we have.
So do you agree that these fragmentations that we are seeing, these cracks, if you will, are not as important or as threatening for Europe's security, that the unity that is there, as Christoph was mentioning, is enough?
Well, I think the situation in the Middle East is quite a dilemma for Europe because, as Christoph said, Europe basically has no say in it since Trump left the JCPOA that Europe also negotiated with. On the other side, you know, any instability in the Middle East does affect Europe, might be through terrorism or migration. So we are basically we're having a role as it impacting Europe, but we don't have a say in, you know, how to shape this conflict. And this is really a problem for Europe. But I think it's a problem that, on the one hand, is due to the fact that Europe doesn't really have the clout, in particularly militarily, but also maybe diplomatically, to really impact the situation in Israel, but also in Gaza, but also concerning Iran. But on the other side, sorry, I missed what I was saying.
Take your time.
So on the one hand, like we do not really have a say in it, but on the other side, Trump, the way Trump does its policy is really neglecting European role. So if we look back to the Biden and Obama situation, administration, Europe was as weak as it is today. But the difference is that Trump really doesn't care about any alliance, any partnerships, or any European role. So what we have at the moment is basically a problem that is coming from two directions and really threatens Europeans' security and also future role in any security arrangements. And I think it's really hard for Europeans to find a way out of that situation.
Yes. I'm being told, Martin, that you wanted to begin.
Yes, I wanted to come in on the cracks in the unity that you mentioned and talk a little bit about the Slovak case that you also mentioned, several of you in the studio. And you know, I think we have to distinguish between the rhetoric and the actions, and especially the Slovak case shows this very pronounced that the Slovak rhetoric seems to be very far off from the main effort, but especially on the European level, the decisions that the Slovak government then in the end makes align with the mainstream. I mean, the rhetoric is very damaging to the common cause, to the unity, and basically also hurts deterrence in NATO. But this sounds like I'm trying to apologize for the Slovak government. That's not the case. I'm just saying that the cracks that you hear might not be the cracks that are actual cracks in the unity. That might be the case not only with sanctions towards Russia, but also with the Middle East, where some of the internal political situations for governments make it for them very hard to align so openly with the main line.
Words against actions, that seems to be a very important aspect in this discussion. Christoph, do you think that despite everything that we've heard, Europeans have understood that they're on their own now, that they didn't want to understand that in the past?
They are on their way to understanding. There is a mental change, especially in Germany, which is the biggest economy. It's really important that we have this mentale Zeitenwende, a mental change, that we understand that there is a huge threat, that it is much closer than many of us might think. NATO is talking about 2029. In my book, I just returned from the US, where I wrote a book on a possible war in Lithuania. There, my scenario is 28. I meet now German politicians who say maybe you are too optimistic. If Putin understands that Germany and Europe is starting to prepare for this war, he might act earlier in order to overtake us. But one thing is sure, as long as Ukraine fights, Putin doesn't have the possibility to open a second front. But if Putin and Trump are able to freeze this conflict, to have a deal, as they say, then it gets very dangerous. So Europe really should shoulder the burden to give Ukraine all what they need to defend. And that saves us time to prepare.
We have time for one last only yes, no question, please. I'm going to start with you, Martin. Is it worth spending so much more money on defense?
Yes, definitely yes.
Yes.
It's not worth it. It's necessary, and we just have to do it.
Sarah also
Yes,
said
definitely.
Yes, and that
Okay.
is normal. 3.5% is normal, not much.
We'll leave
Not
it.
too much.
We'll leave it with that idea. Consensus at our table. Thank you very much, all three of you, for this discussion. Of course, you for watching. Remember, you can always watch our shows on YouTube. Simply look for DW News and the latest To The Point episode. I'm Javier Arguedas on behalf of the entire team here. Till next time, take care and goodbye.